That's a really good question. I often get that when I'm showing it to cinema students as well. I did not want to make a personal documentary. I didn't want, I get uncomfortable when I see the poster. I was going to make this, I had this great idea. I was going to make this objective film. And it was just going to be about, men who love Asian women. And I was going to follow them and see whether they would find the Asian women of their dreams. And I originally had about 5. I had more than that, but I had about 5 men of many different ethnicities and age groups. One of them was African American. One of them was, there was even an Asian American guy who said he had yellow fever. And Stephen was one of the 5 guys, and I was just gonna, I thought it would be interesting. I mean, part of it was, there were sort of some feminist ideas in there, without being too, direct. I thought it would be cool just to turn the tables and point the, instead of being looked at all my life, I wanted to kind of examine them. But that, the men didn't, not all the men I found, none of them found the Asian women they were looking for, except for the one I thought was the least likely. And then his story just took over. I mean, and then once that happened, it was very difficult for me to take myself out of the story. I just got caught in the middle.
I was wondering, well, first of all, when was this released?
It premiered at South by Southwest Film Festival in 2012.
Okay.
Yes, and then it was actually, but then it had its broadcast premiere on PBS in 2013.
I was wondering what kind of response you've gotten since then, and especially have Sandy and Stephen seen it, and what do you think about it?
Yeah. Well, they saw it. They came with me at the premiere at South by. Yeah. And I think it's got a lot of, in many ways it got a lot more, it did better than I thought it would. I mean, I couldn't, I felt very lucky that it got so much exposure. Because you never know, I mean, it's a small independent film about a subject that used to be quite, you would talk about it with, if you're Asian American, it's probably, and you're a woman, it's probably one of the #1 issues in your life. But then you talk to somebody else about it, like, what's your problem? What are you talking about? You're pretty, or whatever it is. So most people would look at you like, why are you making a film about that? But I've noticed, like, over the years that the film has been out, it's just become much more a part of the national conversation. And there have been some really interesting things, like, circling back to the online dating. There was a study that came out, I think it must be now a year ago. You guys might have heard about this as well. What is that online service called? There's a dating service that did a study about, they surveyed all of their users, and they found that Asian women are the most popular of all the, online dating. They get the most, whatever it is, likes or, cokes or, I don't know what it is. I have to look it up later. But they found that all men prefer them, except for Asian men. Or not, maybe it's not surprising. I think like Latino women or something like that. But there's this idea out there that Asian women are somehow, it's not that surprising. But Asian women are it is kind of surprising for someone like me, because I grew up a long time ago when Asian Americans were really invisible. But there was kind of a title shift where we went from being totally invisible to being kind of, this trophy catch or something, I don't know. But going back to, I think to answer your second question about Stephen and Sandy, it's a really intimate film, and they were really brave to let me tell their story. And I think because it has had so much exposure, it also people talk about it in many different ways, and even people who don't see the film talk about it. Because what I've also learned is that just putting young Asian woman, older white man together as a statement provokes a lot of conversation from a lot of people. So, and then they have to live their life. And I think it's obviously different for them than it is for me.
just before the wedding when she confesses that she would be back in China if it weren't for you. I think at that point I feel like I would have very conflicted feelings about my role, if I should be pushing them towards marriage or if I should be really on Sandy's side and saying that, you know, if you feel you should go back, then you should go back. I don't know, how do you explain that that moment, I guess?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I think it's something that pretty much all documentary filmmakers grapple with, because you're making a film about real people, and and I chose to tell the story in a way that included my own stereotypes and assumptions that I had as I made the film. You know, what I noticed was that they changed quite significantly over time, and you know, it became clear to me at a certain point that Stephen was not, like, he was actually the person that would get hurt the most when he was corresponding with these women, because I think you go into it thinking that this, you know, white American guy has all the power in the relationship, but when you look further into it, you realize that it's pretty complicated, and it's kind of there's a two-way thing going on, more than a two-way thing going on. And I remember when I kind of assumed once he finally did find someone that would agree to marry him in such an odd circumstance, I just assumed the worst, and I thought, oh no, she's gonna just, you know, because I knew him by that point, and I could just see it was gonna be a train wreck. And then I was completely wrong. The minute I met her, I remember the first night that I shot, you know, when she's coming out of the airport. That was the first time I had met her in person. And I knew immediately when I was filming her that she was not, that she had a good heart. You know, she was pretty genuine. And I had that night I went home and I had a nightmare, actually, that I had just, you know, that about Stephen, that Stephen was going to take advantage of her. So it was this constantly, you know, who's going to take advantage of who kind of thing. When you realize that actually the two of them are in it for the long haul, and it's not as much of a battle of who's going to dominate the other as it is how are they going to work with each other. So I don't know if that answers your question. It's a complicated thing. Filmmaker, I knew that she was genuine because she let me film her. You know. So I think there was a question back there.
Yeah, I was wondering, so like coming into the film, like with your own experiences and assumptions about men who prefer Asian women, how have those views changed, like after making the film and getting to know Stephen and Sandy?
Yeah, I mean, they. I don't know if there's any young women out here who have ever dealt with that sort of like yellow fever, drives you crazy. Asian-American female documentary friends who have come up to me and said, I was going to make that film. But it's almost like making the film, you know, my perspective has shifted to, you know, all the statistics are still there, you know, and there's definitely still people who go, Germans who are Thailand and see younger women or rural conditions. It's a pretty unbalanced relationship, and there's definitely problems with sex trafficking that are related to kind of exploiting the idea of the exotic Asian woman. And there's still people, you know, and definitely it's not like objectification of Asian women or women in general doesn't exist, right? But at the same time, when I see people, like if I see a couple together walking down the street, I know they have a story. There's a story behind how they got together. And I know that it's actually much more nuanced and complicated than it is from those statistics, even though I may still not like the statistics at the beginning. And I was like struggling at it, and I had actually stopped shooting when Stephen called me and said, hey, I'm going to get married. You want to film my wedding? Are you movie. And I had to, one of my advisors actually had to convince me, because I originally I was to film that story, because I felt like, oh, this is going to get really ugly. And then I'm going to be left with the stereotype of this Chinese woman who's, you know, we have a lot of negative images of Asian women. I don't really know, and then it's just going to be, I don't know if I want to make that film. But, you know, of course, it was, as a filmmaker, you couldn't really not try. So I think at that point, I knew that it was going to be about their, once she came and I started filming them, you know, I knew that story was going to take over. I just didn't know the way in which it would, and I didn't know that I was going to be a character in it until much later. Seriously though, then I just started working. I mean, after college, I just tried to work in film. That's how that sounds so simple. So simple, right? You know, I did try. You know, the first film I worked on was a film called The Joy Luck Club, and then I kind of knew after that I really wanted to make independent films, and it's kind of a long road to hoe. So you have to. That's a longer story. You guys can ask me later on if you. But one last comment that I have is, you know, I was in and out, but I was standing outside, and you guys are really loud. So it's a fun audience to hear. You may have been like the loudest or the second loudest audience that I've shown. Anyway. Thanks for coming, everyone.